Hey everyone, welcome to the HamptonRoads.net user group. My name is Kevin Griffin. I am joined by my cohort Drew. Drew, how are you today?
I'm doing very good, sir.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm trying to look at the camera, but the screen's over there, and I have to do the weird live streaming thing. I'm going to try to look at the camera the entire time. Everyone's here today. I'm so thankful on both Twitch and YouTube. There might be one little sucker out there on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, get off LinkedIn and go over to YouTube. It's a much better experience. But we are here today to learn from Mr. Joe Kunk. How are you today, Joe?
I am great, thank you.
Awesome. So we were talking right before going live that we don't really see many talks on Windows development anymore, and I was actually really interested when you gave us the topic on something Windows development because literally everything is web this, web that, or mobile, mobile, mobile. It's never, hey, let's build Windows apps or let's test Windows apps. So I think myself and everyone out there watching are really interested to see what you have to say. You said it's a new talk, so we're all throwing our support behind that this goes well. Um, with that said, if you're out there watching and you have any questions, just leave a comment, and I'll gently interrupt Joe whenever it's feasible. And Joe, I'm going to go ahead and turn on your screen share.
Okay.
And you can take it from here.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. I appreciate you being here, whether you're live with me now or later on the video. Is about Windows automation testing, and it is a topic that when I was first engaged by the client to work on this project. I found there wasn't much information on the internet about it, and we had to do a lot of trial and error and kind of struggled to get information. So I thought, well, once I get far enough along on how all this works, I will help that situation and share some information. So this is part of the effort tonight to do that, to bring some information on how to do all this where not much is not available if you Google, and hopefully you find it very helpful. Um, so my name is Joe Kunk. I had been active in the user community for a couple decades now, actually, almost a couple decades. I've been leader of the Lansing, Michigan user group GlugNet for I think I'm at 18 years now on the board. Um, but I'm a senior software architect at a company called DuPoint based in Lansing, Michigan. I specialize in three different areas: Microsoft.NET, SQL Server, and some application security. Uh, I typically do application assessments, security assessments for clients. Um, the slide says 17 years, 18 years. Who's counting, right? Uh, and when I'm not doing my user group and working, my pastime right now and for the last 6 months and probably going for a while longer is working on Azure certifications. I really want to get up to speed on all things Azure. It's a pretty big beast. It's not something you can do overnight, but I have been working on it. And I actually have passed 5 Azure certification tests in the last 6 months. I don't know if I'd be able to keep that pace up, but I'm working at it as fast as I can. And in the next slide, I'll actually show you my progress. I'm pretty happy and pleased of that. I was a former Microsoft MVP for 6 years. I am no longer. It's a pretty big lift in terms of time commitment, and so I voluntarily gave that up some years ago. I was a author in Visual Studio Magazine. Um, Rough count around 33 articles published some time ago. They're still on the website, visualstudiomagazine.com, if you ever want to go see some of my old writings. They're getting to be about 10 years old now, but some of them are still relevant. And I was a Pluralsight author, one of the first ones on their catalog. That course has now been taken down because Microsoft no longer does that thing. But it was an interesting experience, taught me a lot about video training. And when I get a little more time, I hope to get back to authoring some more courses. These are my two email addresses, professional and personal. You're welcome to use either one. If you want to just ask me a question on Windows automation, feel free to hit me up on either one. Or if you're interested in having your company maybe investigate doing some Windows automation with us, you certainly can hit me on my professional email. We'd be happy to talk about that. The picture on the right is my last trip to China. Um, I married a lady from China. That's her right there, Baoshang Lee. She goes by Annie here in America. She's been with me now in America for about 4 years. This was our first formal date, so it's a great place to go hang out on a first date. Um, it was in the. You'll see it's not very crowded. I hear that in the summer it's like shoulder to shoulder crowded. This was in December on the top of a mountain, and it was just cold as heck, so it wasn't crowded. But you can see the wall behind. It was pretty interesting. We walked for about 2 hours and came back to where we started. Uh, some interesting facts later on. If you care to email me, I can tell you some pretty cool things about it. It's stuff you wouldn't know unless you're actually there. Like I'll just give one. Those walls are different sizes. You can see the size. The wall facing out has uh, the holes for shooting arrows and whatever. The inside wall is smooth and shorter because you don't need that stuff on the inside wall. So it's interesting that both walls are not the same, um, both sides of the wall. So anyway, I'll go on. That's an aside. I'll go on. This is my certification path. I put together a little graphic that I worked on, and it helps me visually map where I'm going. As I mentioned, I have completed all 5 of the developer-oriented fundamentals tests, and I'm now working on the Power BI analyst test because we have clients who need Power BI, and my employer tells me that having another person that can do that would be a great thing. So, and these numbers get revised every time I pass a test. I rethink what do I really want to do. But it's a pretty ambitious list. It's 18 tests, but wish me luck. I hope I can do it in the next year or two. As I said, I want to learn all things Azure, so pretty excited about that. Um, moving on to why we're actually here today. This is about Windows automation. We're going to cover basically 5 major topics. The first one is an automation overview. Generic. What is it? Why do we want to do it? How have we set things up to be able to do it? Um, what kind of client environment am I working in? And then I'm going to do a demo, and we're going to talk a little bit about where we're going after that. Technology stack. We're going to go over some code, the fun stuff for many of the people here. So stick around for that. And we'll talk about how do we what's different about testing a Windows app versus a web app or traditional C# coding. So we'll go over that a little bit. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've encountered and some we're potentially still facing a bit because life never gets easy when you're a developer or as easy as you'd like it. And then we'll wrap up with a summary. So pretty straightforward agenda, and let's go ahead and get started. So start off with a quote. Pretty good testing is easy to do. Excellent testing is quite hard to do. And that's by James Bach. He is the founder of Satifice. It's a dedicated company that does only testing. So I thought that was a very appropriate quote for what we're going to talk about tonight. And I fully endorse what he said. All right. So section 1, automation overview. What's different? What are the benefits? And how have we set up a project to do this? Obviously, this is a client project I'm working on and have been working on for a little over a year now, I think. So it's more than a year. So this is not something brand new for me. It's something I've worked a lot of the kinks out of, and so I'll share what those are. So what's different? Well, just to kind of really set the foundation, make sure we got a clear understanding, a common understanding. Um, Windows user interface testing is not application unit tests that are coded by the original developer of the application. And it's not web interface testing. So there are definitely differences between Windows interface testing and web interface testing. Um, one thing I want to make really clear is that you cannot replace all your manual testers with automation testing. Automation testing is a very important niche of the process, but it can't. You still need manual testing. And one of the large reasons is because automation testing takes time to code, and if you want to react quickly to something, you need a manual tester. Plus manual testers see things that automation doesn't. Your human eye will catch something not in the right place, or uh, something that wasn't there before or should be there. And if that's not in the exact test suite you're running, automation won't see it. So you need manual testers. You can reduce the number of manual testers, but you cannot eliminate them. And another thing we have to be clear on is that UI testing is software testing. So if there's a manual device involved in any way, such as an IoT device, or some kind of device that imports or exports data from the application, um, obviously automation cannot do what you have to do with your hands. So we've had to keep that in mind as we do our work. We do actually have a device involved in the project, so we've had to um, segment the things we can test with just software and the things that we can test when the device is involved, and basically have two suites of tests for that. And just to be clear, this is not macro recording. We're not recording macros and playing them back. This is coding C# from scratch. So for all you developers out there who love to code, that's good news. You're not dealing with macros. Hopefully that was clear and I didn't go through it too fast. All right. What are the benefits? And this is not really meant to be a slide presentation or a sales presentation, but I included all this detail because if you do want to do Windows automation testing and you're finding any kind of resistance, or why would we do that, or why should we bother, um, this slide can help. And I will make the slides available to the group afterwards, so you can download these. But obviously, regression testing is the common one. You want to make sure that if something was working before, it continues to work. In my professional job doing this, even today, automation testing revealed a bug that reappeared on a new build. So, I mean, it happens and we caught it. So, I mean, I think that's probably goes into number two, faster feedback cycle. I would say that's really the best part of doing Windows automation testing. And we're doing, in my case, we're doing it as part of the development, right? I'm following builds and building automation tests to implement features of the new builds, or catching up on some old features of the old builds. But you may have heard the term shift left, and what we're doing is we're shifting left the testing, right? We're getting that testing as close to the actual release of the product or the actual release of the build, so that we know about errors as soon as possible and we can react to them as soon as possible, and that minimizes time expenditures from the developers. They're when a bug is fresh, they can find it and resolve it faster. It's in their, still in their collective minds, and that ultimately reduces cost. um, it's always more costly to fix a bug later in the process, so the faster we can find them, the better. It's not practical to have a manual tester test every single feature at every build when you might have a build every day, and typically we do. But automation can do that. So our client has found that to be extremely helpful. They're seeing the difference in the quality, and they're quite happy. Greater test coverage, another reason. Obviously, automation can test a lot more things than you can do manually. Just tediousness. Um, and you know I have part of my demo that I'll show you today is, we're building out a screen with many, many pieces of data, much faster than a human could ever do it, and then verifying that was done correctly. So that's all good. You can test more often if you wish. um, there's not a lot of benefit of testing more than once per build, but you can. My test suite right now currently runs about less than 30 minutes, so I could test, obviously, multiple times a day if I wanted to. Um, Sometimes you want to test in different environments. You want to test it in maybe Windows 10 and maybe Windows 11, and blah blah blah. So you could set up a situation where you're testing in those different environments um, on a more frequent basis. Obviously, when you've automated your tests, you don't get typos, you don't forget to do a step. all those issues go away, so you have more comprehensive, more accurate testing. Um, Automation can work with much larger data sets than a human being ever would. We have one screen where we enter 3,000 rows of data. That's a little bit tedious for a human being, but automation doesn't have a problem with it. Uh, Independent tests, setting up the data. Part of the testing is getting your environment the way you want it, and that can be tedious. And automation can make that much easier. Another thing that's really nice is that when a test fails, on the line there it says detailed analysis. When a test fails, we can give a pretty comprehensive representation of why it failed. Um, the automation writes log entries at literally every step. So when something fails, I have a log of typically, thousands of lines that give me detail into what really happened, and I, as the automation developer, can resolve issues much faster. Or at a minimum, I can tell the application developer, hey, it had a problem right here, and I can nail it pretty tight to where the issue was based on that log, which a manual tester may not necessarily be able to do as well. Um, so uh, as the automation testing, it starts out a little slow because you're really developing the core basics of all the testing, the core routines, and then as time goes on, it gets faster because you can start leveraging those routines. Um, that's actually a lesson learned from this experience. Was when I first started, we had tests. I was trying to get as many tests out there as quick as I could. So I'd have a test that would build a file. And then the next test would take that built file and uh, do something with it, some kind of modification, and validate that modification. Well, if test A failed, then test B couldn't run, and that became a problem. So we actually learned that what we had to do was set up separate test environments for every single test. So if test A builds a file, that's great, but test B will stage a pre-built file of all that data it needs and then run. And that pre-staged data on test B may be actually what was the output of test A, but it will be a separate file and it'll be independent. And if test A fails, it has no impact on test B. So we really had to isolate the tests, making sure that any one test could fail and not impact any others. And that was a lesson learned. I didn't do that initially at first, in my eagerness to get more tests running. Um, and what our client decided to do was, because the automated testing took over some of what the manual testers were doing, rather than reducing the labor on manual testers, what they did was they gave the manual testers, more discretion to go out and test new things on their own and things that automation couldn't easily do, and so it improved the quality of our testing, significantly across the group. I mean, we obviously have we have one full-time manual tester and then a couple part-time. Um, and Another thing that benefits um, Windows automation testing is, I'm a C# developer on the team, working with the C# developers who are developing the product, and so we can talk developer speak, for lack of a better term. Uh, and typically when you have testers on a project, they're business testers, and they don't know how to talk, developer. Uh, so I can talk developer with the application developers and communicate much easier with them. What the test found and what I think would help to resolve it. Um, so they find that as a benefit. So that's a quick summary of what the benefits are. If you're finding that you want to make a case for this, this hopefully will be helpful. I've actually thought of a few more, but I thought, oh, that's enough. So we'll go on. So if you want to automate, what to automate? What should you automate? And you probably have standard operating procedures. or you have some kind of manuals or instructions or policies or procedures that you follow in the application. So usually from just the way you tend to use it, that's documented somewhere, and that can be used as a basis for automation to start with. We also do run this project as an agile project. So we have the typical backlog board. And so if anyone wants to take a manual test and have that automated because it continues to come up, or they want to make sure it's verified at every build, they can just make an entry on the agile backup board, and then it'll be dealt with as appropriate and when time permits. Customer support issues are a great source of automation tests. We want to make sure the customers have a great experience, and if they're not, um, the developers will make changes to resolve that issue, and then I will write the automated test to make sure it stays that way, and that doesn't slip back in, in a future build. So that's another source of automation issues. And then if your manual test plans, of course, can be used as a basis for knowing what to automate. I've never lacked for things to be in front of me to need to automate. Uh, and really, the client drives that priority. So I automate things in the order in which the client says is most important, as any agile project would. So we typically always have a pretty good backlog of automation issues to automate or to process. Moving on, we'll talk about a little bit about how I got involved in this and what my project is like, and so you get a feel for what it might be like if you get involved in it. We are working for a Fortune 500 corporation. They do distribute commercial products internationally. Uh, and so we got the typical, multiple languages issues, things like that. Um, this client does have multiple software development teams. I'm on the team for one product. We have another team that's developing a different product, and they have Windows automation testing team or developer as well. So within this one client, we have two different automation projects going on. Um, and again, they feel it's a benefit enough that they've invested, in a second automation developer. So pretty excited about that. It gives me someone to talk to and to work with when I have any questions or concerns, and we can, you know, just kind of team together to figure things out. It's been great. Um, so I already talked about, a third product's being considered, and that third product would have an automation developer as well. So they're fully committed to it. Um, My particular team that I'm on, we have two full-time software developers other than myself. So I am considered, even though I'm doing automation testing, I am considered one of the developers. Um, and we have, as I said, several part-time manual testers. I believe one full-time in addition. We have a product owner, a stakeholder, agile scrum master, and a product support technician. These are typical agile roles. Our product owner is really good. Um, and I thought I put a link somewhere in one of the slides. There's a YouTube video about how to be a product owner. And if you're involved in an agile team, a little bit of an aside here, but if you're involved in an agile team, it's really, really important to have a good product owner, and to have that product owner comfortable in their role and to know what they should do and understand what they should do. And it's something that was always a little bit hard to communicate to the business. I've been on multiple projects. It was always hard to communicate to the business, but our Scrum Master found a video that explains it really, really, really well. About a 15-minute video, and it's definitely worth watching if you're on an agile team in any role. But certainly want to make sure your product owner sees it, watches it. I think I put it on one of the slides. If I manage to omit that, I will provide it provide it to Kevin, and he'll make sure it's available to you. But it's definitely worth watching. Oh, there it is. Okay. Um, so I haven't memorized my slides yet. There's the link, and I'll provide the deck, so you'll get the link in the deck. But our main communication tool is Teams. We run in typical 2-week sprints. We have a 15-minute stand up every day, and they have the processes of backlog refinement and retrospective, and whatever that you've experienced on agile projects if you've been on one. We do use Jira as our tool for organizing the board, and the basic columns in the board are backlog, sprint backlog, in development, ready for build, testing, UAT, PO approval, product owner approval is what that means, and then done. So one of my frustrations when I talk with people about Agile is they give me the concepts, but they don't give me the details. Like, how do you set up a board? What should my board look like? This is what our board looks like. Yours can be different. That's fine. But if you're looking for a little bit of guidance, there it is. And it actually works well for us. Ready for build is when, just to explain that one, ready for build is when the developer has actually coded the solution based on their story. They've verified it and they've included it as part of the stories for the next build. Then when that build is done, it moves over into testing, and then a business person will test it. Either it'll be a business person that tests it. Then it goes over to user acceptance testing, which is a second business person testing. It can't be the same, verifying that it is in fact working, and then it goes for product owner approval and then done. That's the process. Again, as I said, it's working well. And then my board, I have a separate board for automation, and that's actually a Kanban board. So it's not based on necessarily on 2-week sprints, but it's based on the ability for work to flow from stage to stage to stage. Because I don't always know how long it's going to take me to write an automation test. Sometimes they can be complicated, and I can't necessarily commit to for a single developer, it's not worth the complexity of a full agile board. Kanban works much better. It's just a workflow based board. And I just have a couple of areas: backlog selected for development, in development, and then product owners approved it and done. So it's simpler. But that's the difference in our boards. Okay, so this gives you the background, is understanding how our project works. Are there any questions to this point? Because we're going to go, before we go into section 2.
Nothing so far. Everyone's being
Okay.
pretty quiet and engaged.
All right. Well, I hope hope everything's making sense. If it isn't, feel free to make any comments. I appreciate them. One of the joys of presenting is I get to learn from my audience. So that's hard to do if you don't speak up. So speak up. We're going to do demo, and I'm going to actually show you an application being automated, and I'm going to have to kill the slides to do that. So let me see if I can get out of these slides. Okay. And then I'm going to run 2 pieces of software. One of the problems with ignore what that says right there, but one of the problems with showing a demo of automation is it's just running an app and it doesn't explain to you what it's doing. So I'm trying to solve that problem. I haven't officially fully solved it yet, but what I've done is I put together this little screen here that at the beginning of each test it'll give a summary of what that test is going to do. So hopefully it'll make more sense to you when you see it. This won't take too long. It's not a very long demo. But I'm going to go ahead and let's see here, annotations. Then I want to go to Visual Studio and run it from Visual Studio. And I clicked on Teams and I did not mean to do that. Okay, let's get back to Visual Studio. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and get that started. Okay, so this is test 1. I think I have 5 tests. It's just a simple application. Well, what you're going to see is an application that we had an intern put together this summer, and it's just really to demo the Windows automation process without doing, actually showing a client app, which, for confidentiality reasons, we're not allowed to do. So pretty simple, but this one is just to show the app being logged into and then logging out. And this is all being done live through the automation. Oh, I need to stop. Okay, it's sensitive in that it started on the screen that you're not seeing. So let me try this again, move my cursor over here, and hopefully it'll start there. Minimize that. Come over here. There it is. So we're just going to log in. This has obviously been slowed down so you can see it. And Yeah, very simple. Just logged in and then log back out and close the app. Um, we'll go on to the next one, which is we navigate among the pages, use products, users, home, and log out. Again, pretty simple, but just this is all done. I remember to move my mouse. Sorry about that. It starts on whatever screen my mouse is on. Uh, okay, I skipped to the second test. So you don't have to watch the first one again. Okay, it's just going to move between the pages and log out once it logs in. And you see the cursor tracking over. That's for demo purposes. In a production test, we would never do that. It would just jump instantly over. But for demo, we want you to see the cursor moving so it's more obvious. There, we're little product screen, little user screen, and we log out. Go back to home, sorry, and then log out. And so one thing I was playing with this yesterday, testing it, and I noticed that the font's too small on the screen, so I'll have to increase the fonts, but I did not have time to do that for today. Okay. On this one, we're just going to add an operator and then fail with a bad password to show that we can catch errors and that it doesn't stop the test sequence. Can I get that over here? Okay, I got to resolve that. I'll try this again. Get you to the third test. Apologize, I'm getting used to this process. Is that it? There's users. Yep, we're going to add a user, and we're going to fail this on a bad password. Unfortunately, you can't see the bad password, but that's what's causing the fail. Okay, and then click the OK, and we log out. We go to log out. All right. So next one, we're going to add a user, George Smith, and we're going to move the user called Dan Delete. So let me hit start, get my cursor over here. I know these are pretty simplistic, but it gives the idea this is a live automation demo, and it proves that it does work. And then you see George Smith is now on the list, and we're going to go up and click on Dan Delete, and then delete him. Remove him, actually, is the official term. And he's gone. So that test passed. And second to the last test, we're going to change the username and log in as that user to prove that we can do that. Change him to Ali and log in as Ali. Okay, he's been changed to Ali. We'll log out and then log in as Ali. And that will wrap up that test. And one more. So we're going to actually import some products and show that they appear in the drop-down list. And this just demonstrates the ability to interact with Windows System Dialog that's outside of the application being automated. So we're not limited to automating just the application that's the target application. Log in. Go to the product screen, and we're going to import some from a CSV file. And there it is. Actually type in the name of the file to open it. It's been imported. And when we hit the drop down, you'll see it's a pretty lengthy drop down. It was just a couple items before that. There. So there's more in there that was there before. And that is it for the demo. I know that was pretty exciting. You can collect your admission fee on the door on your way out. But in all seriousness, I actually have a better demo. That was put together by the intern. It shows the basic capabilities, but I also wanted you to see what it really looks like in the real world. So I took a screen from our current production application of the client, and I blurred out the parts that I wouldn't want, that he would be sensitive about seeing, he, the client, and show something a little bit more realistic about what it really looks like in a uh, real world. So I will show you that video right now. This is the real live project. We're we're adding room types. Even this has been slowed down some, so you can see it happening. So we've added those room types. Now we're going to go ahead and add some rooms and set a type to each room. And each rooms belong to areas, and each area has its own set of rooms. So that's why you see the rooms grid kind of clearing as we move through different areas, creating different areas. Those were created as part of this project. This file started blank. So we're building some rooms and with room types here. This normally would run about twice as fast as this. Okay, now we're going to build some sites. And sites have those settings. I think we're going to build about 10 of them, if I remember right. You see it working with the drop downs. Drop downs are a little bit difficult to automate. But you can see we've got, drop downs, we've got text boxes that we're changing, we've got check boxes, a more representative set of controls that you might run into in a Windows app. Okay. Then the app's going to go through and verify all the information on the screen to make sure it's what it should be. There you see it running through the bottom grid again, checking everything, verifying the data. And we're almost done. And that's it. So that's a more realistic demo. That's production quality demo of what we actually do. Any questions on that? All right. So let me go back to the presentation. I have one small demo left. You're not fully done with demos yet. Let's see, where do I want to be? I want to be right here. Go back to present mode. Okay, so running these tests is great, but we need some way to communicate that back to myself, to the uh, application developers and to the business of what happened and what's the results of our tests. And we went through several iterations on how to do this, and this is the current iteration. So we've really thought through this quite a bit. I want to go over it with you. The subject of the email goes out obviously via email whenever test is done. Um, right in the top, right in the heading, how many tests failed. If that's 0, the customer knows they don't even have to open the email. So that's helpful to them. The full log of the entire test suite is included in the email. So if there's any questions about what really happened, the business doesn't tend to look at that. They get it, they don't tend to look at it. But if I or the application developers have questions, we've got the log right there in the email. We don't have to go hunting for it. Um, and this is who we send it to. We send it to the developers, the product owners, stakeholders, the Agile team members. Um, we give the version number of the application being tested because there's multiple builds. And let's see right here, there's multiple builds, so they'll know which build I was testing. I also give the version of the automation program I'm testing with, so they can match those two back together if there's any questions in the future. What server I'm running on for the testing, uh, how many tests failed, and then we have known issues. This is something we added at the end more recently. We've had it for a little while, but more recently. And basically, what we were finding was, a process would fail because there was a bug in the application. And then that bug would show up every single day for the next 2 to 3 weeks potentially until the sprint it was incorporated from the backlog into the sprint and then worked on and then tested and put in a build. It could be 2 to 3 weeks between the time we found a bug and when it actually was resolved. And by having it listed in the results email every single day, I was essentially teaching the business to ignore the errors because I'm seeing that every day. Why do I have to pay attention to that? And so it was counterproductive. I wanted the business to be alert to any new issues right away, and I wanted the application developers to be alert to the new issues right away. But I was teaching them to ignore them, which is not what I wanted to do. So anything I actually coded in my application automation application that if there's a bug that was filed on that particular issue, and it's in the backlog, it moves it over into the known issues section, effectively giving it a lower priority and a lower visibility uh, than a brand new issue. So I really, really want them to focus on a brand new issue. Like on the very top there on the right, it says 41, test 41, verify old data grid failed. That's a fresh fail. That just failed for the first time. So that's what we want to focus on. We don't care about the ones that we know will eventually be resolved. Um, we don't care as much anyway. And then on the bottom there, you'll see it says known issues that passed. This is more or less for me. If a known issue, let's say that there was a bug in the application and we're testing it and it's failing, so it's in the known issues. Then all of a sudden it passes because the build was released that fixed that issue. It would no longer be listed in the known issues. It would move to the known issues that passed section so that I, as the automation developer, can manually go in and verify that that issue is in fact resolved, and then I'll remove that known issue from the application. Uh, and so then any new bugs that come up in that same test would show up as a failed test, new bug, not a known issue. So when something appears in known issues not failed, that's a flag to me to verify and get it out of the known issue list. Um, You'll notice in test 41 on the right, verify inventory data grid, item widget not found, test fail, blah, blah, blah. So tests, the log records different various statuses in the operation of the test. Whenever it reaches like a little milestone within the test, it'll write a comment, and those comments appear on this email under the test number if it fails. If it doesn't fail, you never see them. So it gives me and the application developers an immediate, kind of around here type of sense of what that bug was and why it failed. I can look at those two lines there and get a better idea of, well, what's going on? Why did it fail? Obviously, I've got other tools available. I've got the full log. And another thing we do too is you may be familiar with the tool TextMiss Snagit tool, not very expensive. It's a great screenshot tool, but that actually has a Windows COM interface. And so what we've implemented is that if a test fails, the screen that's running at that moment when it fails will get a screenshot and it'll get written out to the log folder. So for every failed test, I have a screenshot of what that screen looked like when it failed. So that's another debug tool I have to figure out what's going on. Because these run at night when I'm sleeping and I don't see it fail. Um, Another extension of that, the other automation team, they have tests that'll run hours. They're very, very complicated tests. So they actually video record with Snagit. They actually video record the entire test, so that they can go back the next morning and watch that video of the test and kind of zoom forward and back, or move back and forth and see what happened. If the test passed, it automatically deletes the video file. If it failed, it leaves it there for the developer to review the next day. So depending on what you want, you can do snapshots or video or both. And you see that in this particular case, we had 18 tests pass for a total of 22. So this is the business email. The business will see this when, or receive this when at the end of each test suite. But we actually have an extension to it here. And this is a second version of the email that goes to the developers. So the developers will get that prior screen, everything on the prior screen, but they get this in addition. So and that's myself and the application developers. And so it tells me all the tests that pass because I want confirmation that that test actually worked. Business doesn't care. They figure if they don't see it, it's fine. But I want to see it. I also get a list of all the timings of each test. How long did each test take to run? Because that's a good indicator to me. If a test normally takes 20 seconds to run and all of a sudden it's taken 3 minutes, something's wrong. So even if it passed and it took us, but it took a significantly longer period of time than before, I want to know that. So that's why we have timings here. And then I get the total runtime of the entire suite as a piece of information. And then finally on the bottom there, you see that grid, the two grids. We have what we call the test tracker database. So every time we run a test suite, it makes entries into the test tracker database of that, a test suite run was done, when it started, finished, how long did it take, what products, versions. And then for each test that run, we get the summary line. And so um, it gives, again, it's a historical record of the testing. So the benefit of that is that then we can do trend analysis. We can build charts for the client on how the testing's been going. All the things that all helps us communicate to the client and to management that this has value, because we can show how this testing has improved over time in a certain feature. The feature's gotten better because the tests have identified it and we've resolved it. um, so this database, we're not leveraging it a lot right now, but in the future, we're building it now, and in the future, it'll give us a lot of potential, like Power BI type reports that we could use to demonstrate value to the client. And I just had this slide here as a reminder to mention that we can and will continue to develop reports off that tracker database. This, before I go into this, any questions? A little pause point for questions.
Let's see. No, chat's been fairly quiet.
Okay. All right. You're either overwhelmed or underwhelmed. We'll find out. Testing roadmap. So this is kind of the stages of how we've progressed through this process. Again, full disclosure, try to share as much as I can. This product actually runs in two different modes, and we develop automation tests separately for each mode. So that's why there's two. Whoop, let's go back here. I bumped my mouse wheel. Apologize. Um, that's why we have these two rows, and progress through the plan is at a separate pace for each mode. Obviously, the first thing we went through was setup, just kind of setting up all the tests and processes and things. Then we had to create an installation process, what we refer to as the silent install. because we need to install the build every single time that it's released. And so we had to have a process. And actually, it's a separate little console utility that detects that new version and installs it if it's there. Um, then the next thing we moved on to was building users, and we have what we call operator users and administrative users. So we all the processes that support that. Here, all the processes that support that were built. And then we you saw that we have files that we log into, so we built all the processes that support the operations with the files. Um, then we did typical. Typical is your standard testing processes, your operating procedures, your all the things we talked about on the what to automate slide. So this is like I kind of think of this as happy path testing. Then we took a look at support issues that were current or past and decided which ones were the most important. And we automated a number of automation tests to address customer support issues to make sure that they were resolved and they stay resolved. Then we went into a more general regression testing suite where we tested more and more of the basically we went back to the old completed Jira cards stories and picked a bunch of those and decided to automate those. That's regression in stories. Dashboard is something we've not done yet. That's based on Power BI. We want to do a Power BI dashboard that represents the state of testing at the moment. Nice fancy set of interactive charts and grids that tell us how testing is going. That's coming up pretty quick. And then reporting is making mobile reports available through Power BI so that we could actually be out in the field and look up on our phone and see how testing's been going for the last day or two or three. Um, pipeline pipeline is where we want to look at setting this up a little bit more automated in the sense of multiple test machines. We want to have the ability to right now the test pretty much runs on a test machine, and to go to pipeline, um, we want to be able to include the testing as part of the build pipeline. So when they like you think of in traditional DevOps, right? So a new build is produced, we want to have that build kick off the testing of the full suite and not wait for a nightly run like we do now. Smoke testing is a subset of testing, setting up a subset of testing for the developers so that they can test the pieces that tend to have the most issues, much smaller subset of the full test suite, and they could run that say in 5 minutes at the end of a build, so that they can be comfortable that they've hit the majority of the major issues or important issues before they even release the build. So moving the testing even more left into the application developer's laptop. Um, this is wishful thinking on our part. We're not there yet, but something we want to do. And then finally, on demand. And on demand is one thing I think will be real exciting when we get there. Um, so on demand testing is, we've got, we said this is a international product. So it's running in different parts of the world on different operating systems on different languages. And what we want to be able to do ultimately with the on demand phase or feature is that, let's say a support tech gets a call and they're calling from Mexico, and they're running Windows, an early version of Windows 10, and they're having this particular problem. Well, the support technician could identify which test covers that problem. Then they can kick off an automatic DevOps type pipeline build of that operating system with that version of the program uh, and that test and have it run. And then in a few minutes, they'll get a link to a recorded video of the test, and so that they can go see if our um, archived version of those tools is getting the same problem. So we can know right away, is it a customer problem or is it something that we just didn't catch in that build? Um, we don't have that feature yet, but as progress goes on, we'd like to be able to have that ability to essentially run a customized to the client environment test on demand. So that's our roadmap. You can see this is about where we're at, and it's exciting. I'm looking forward to being able to implement all of these particular stages. If well, and then if there's no questions, I'll move on. But this is our roadmap. The technology stack. Now we're get to a little bit more of the fun stuff. We're going to see some code. Um, so how does this all work? So we use an open source tool called flaUI, FLAUI. I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's an open source .NET library, and it does provide UI testing of Windows applications, as I indicate here. And it's pretty much all the different forms of Windows applications, not just WPF. We're in this case automating WPF, but it could be Win32, it could be uh, WinForms, whatever. Um, and how it works is it essentially ties into the accessibility layer of Windows. So Windows has screen readers and things, and so there's an API layer within Windows to support all that. And flaUI can tie into that and use that to automate the Windows applications. Um, so UIA2 stands for user uh, interface for applications 2, and I think it's user interface for accessibility 2, user interface for accessibility 3. Those are all Microsoft release versions of of that layer. Um, we initially started out with a tool called WinApp but we had to drop it. WinApp is a Microsoft project, and say they recommend it for Windows automation, but we ran into problems with it in that we could see the elements on the screen, but that's all we could see. So if I had a grid with 5 rows, but I knew there were 10, I had no way to even know there were 10 unless I scrolled that grid all the way down. And it just made it really, really hard to automate off-screen elements, and it also made it really, really hard to verify our tests. Um, it just was a tremendous struggle. So, fortunately, flaUI solved many of those problems. So, what really makes flaUI different is that I can access those elements on the target application, but it returns them as objects that can be cast into actual development uh, um, widgets. So um, I can cast a text entry area as a text box, and then I've got the access to the properties of a text box. I've got a dot text, a dot click, etc. Uh, and so it feels very comfortable to me as a developer because now all of a sudden it looks like a text box, and I can use it as a text box. Same thing for combo boxes and check boxes and um, uh, menu items and things like that. So it objectifies in a good way. It objectifies the target application into development objects that I can interact with, and that just made all the difference. Um, there was some debate initially. Do we really want to use an open source library? But this open source library has been around since 2012. It's an outgrowth of the tech stack that white, which was very popular. And I don't feel there's much risk. I mean, it's a tool set that works really well. It's been around for, almost 10 years, if not 10 years. And it's very stable. So even if as far as I know, unless something crazy in new versions of Windows, um, it's not a real active project, but it doesn't need to be. It works really well. Um, and there's the link to that open source project. It is available as a NuGet package, so you don't need to pull the source and build the source and whatever, but just for information, there it is. All right. So this is the NuGet packages that we have installed. flaUI core, of course, is required. And then UIA2 and UIA3. I happen to have included both, but you can pick one or the other. And UIA2 is for automating Windows form applications, the original WinForms. And then UIA3 is targeted to doing WPF and later forms of Windows applications. So if you're not using WinForms, you probably should be using UIA3, just to make it clear. And then, of course, I use JSON. Who doesn't, right? It's a Framework 4.8 project. The application is written in Framework 4.8, and for consistency, the automation is written in the same version. So it's 4.8 framework as well. Okay. So I actually have another small little demo. I promised one more, and the first ones were so exciting. I'm sure you can't wait. But let me do this. I'm going to pull up the application that we automated. No, I'm going to, but I need to click on something else here. Let's see here. This one. Okay. So let's go ahead and just log in real quick. So I have a screen to play with. And here's our, as good as any, we'll do this one. So this is the tool called Windows UI Recorder. I had it on the slide. But we run this tool and we hit record. And when I hit record, then I just position my mouse over any particular control that I want to look at. And then you'll see on the top there, it gives me the full X path of that control. So when you have a Windows application, every single control is organized in a tree structure. And so to access that control, you need to know where it is in the tree and what it's called. And this little handy free tool tells you exactly that. So um, you'll see that button uses the class name list box item and it has the name of home. And I can use that information to search for that particular control in the target application and then access it, cast it however I need to, and proceed. See if there's anything a little bit more exciting. Grids are typically a little bit harder because they have repeating elements, but you can see there's its XPath. Let's click on this image here. There's an image. Let's see if I can find anything a little bit more exciting here. This one. Okay. Let me see if I can zoom it. Yeah, I can zoom it. There. That's a little easier to see. So there's the XPath statement for that particular control. It's the drop down where we selected a product. And you'll see at the end there, it has an automation ID, a product combo box. Automation ID is the easiest way to find a control if the developer bothered to put an automation ID on the WPF XAML when they built it. That's the best one if you have it. If not, you can still find it by searching for a class name and a control name. But automation ID is unique, and so it makes it much easier and faster to find the control. Just to let you know, automation IDs are good. But that answers the question of, well, how do I access the control? I use this tool. I get the XPath statement of where it is in the tree, and then I use that information to automate it. So that's the demo of that. Any questions? Okay.
Silent.
Okay. You can obviously copy this out and paste it into your code, whatever. So silent. All right. Underwhelmed or overwhelmed? Go back the end of that demo. No more demos. You survived. And I didn't have anything crash on me. So there's the move this out of the way maybe. There's the link to read more about that WinApp driver and how to use that recorder if you're working on a project like this. So the other parts of the technology stack, we're using Visual Studio 222. I am actually enterprise level for C#. We're using .NET Framework 4.8, as I mentioned. We're using SQLite as our backend database for automation testing as well as for the application. That's because we didn't want to make people have to install or license the SQL Server to run the application. But if you have SQL Server, it's all the same code. It's no big deal. It'll work just as fine with SQL Server. I mentioned we're using TextSmith Snagit. Obviously, we have to have the application that we're automating, and then you might want to have an SFTP server to be able to transfer code and files from from your development machine to your testing machine, in some kind of a build update process. Pretty simple, nothing too fancy. Yeah, I mentioned we do a screen capture. There's the PDF, link to the PDF that explains how to use a COM interface to record screenshots or video from TextSmith Snagit for this purpose or any other purpose. And it works great. So we do test. We always make sure we test with the latest version of the application, and the developers have their build process set up so that it uploads the latest MSI to the SFTP server. I've got a process that runs prior to automation that checks that SFTP server and checks to see if it's a new version and whether it should install it or not. Basically, it looks at three things. It looks at the FTP version. It looks at my downloads folder to see if I've already downloaded it, but maybe not installed it yet. Sometimes that happens, or sometimes I manually download it. Um, and the installed version itself, and then whichever one is the latest one is the one it'll do. If the latest one is on the FTP server or the download folder, it'll install it. If the installed version is the latest one, it leaves it go and moves on. So pretty simple logic, just to call it out that we do that. Um, we do have. So why didn't I use Jenkins? Why do I just install the MSI? I could build a DevOps pipeline and set up Jenkins and have it pull the latest build and build the build, and that's in some ways nowadays a more traditional approach to implementing a new version of an application. But we didn't do that, and it was a conscious decision not to do that. So I just want to point out here that the reason why we didn't do that is because that commercial product uses multiple third-party development libraries, some of them a little bit expensive. And so we just decided that it was easier and cheaper to just, you know, install the MSI rather than have the development machine do the build. Especially if we want to get to where we're testing on multiple machines, we don't want to have to license that third-party library set to every single test machine. So we're just doing MSIs. We're not doing Jenkins and live builds out of GitHub. We could, but we're not. If you have no third-party libraries that your application depends on, then maybe Jenkins is a good way to go. It wasn't for us. And then just to give you a kind of a flow of the test logic that we do, um, we write the test header to the log. I write the test header to the log, and then you see I forgot a step. I kill any running copy of the target application. Again, I want to make sure I've got a fresh environment to test in for each run. Then I stage any testing files. I log into the testing file, and then I perform any test actions. And it kind of follows the um, traditional unit testing process, of was it assert anyway. But what we do here is we perform the action, and then I immediately validate that action. And if it didn't do what it's supposed to have done, I return false and we fail the test right away. So it's not like a unit test where we might test everything and then fail at the end. It's a potential fail after every single step. And that's to minimize the amount of time spent in a test that's not right, so we can move on to the next test. And then we just repeat that. So a little bit different sequence. Then, if appropriate, we pass the test. And then after all the tests have run, the full suite is done, I parse the log to build the email. And that's a point that's I want to point out this slide and the next one is that the log file is the source of truth. Everything gets written to the log file, saying when a test starts, when a test ends, whether it passed, whether it failed, any of the comments, all that goes into the log file during the running of the testing. And it lets me focus on the testing. I don't have to worry about whether my email, I don't have to worry about building the email while I'm testing. I just make sure the logs entries are correct. And then after the suite is done, it parses that log file and it actually builds the email results email from the log file. So I know that the log matches what the email said because that's where it came from. And so that's a good thing for me. Then we send the developer email, the client email, and we update the tracker database. And then obviously, I will review the test results and modify my either my test code or alert the developers as necessary. So that's the workflow process of running a test suite. Little different. We do use individual test files. If you used a database, you would probably want to stage a new version of the database. We don't use databases; we use files. But just to call out that you may have to stage a database, a new, restored version of a test SQL Server database or whatever as part of your workflow. If you use SQL Server or Oracle or whatever, but you want to stage your data. Um, Tests are run both on demand and with the task scheduler, Windows Task Scheduler. Nothing too fancy. Code coverage. I've had people say, "What's your code coverage on your tests?" And they're used to talking to people who do unit tests, and you get these code coverage metrics out of Visual Studio. But it doesn't make sense from an Windows automation testing. I don't know what the code is in the target application. I never see the code in the target application. So that's a non reasonable question for this type of testing. So code coverage is measured in functional units. I've tested this screen or that part of that screen or that dialogue or that, so I measure testing in application features, not lines of code, just to kind of mention that. And when you automate something, the first thing you have to do in the flaUI code is you have to tell it the name of the application, the COM name, not the file name. And if you're not someone who's worked with COM much, that can be pretty confusing about, well, what is that and where do I find it? And it turns out it's in the details tab of the application or the properties of the exe. So in this case, it's called the ERP. What you saw was called the ERP space application. That's the name I use to link to it from the flaUI. And pretty much anything you want to automate, you go look here and you'll see what the product name is. Simple if you know it, difficult to find if you don't. Okay, and here's a little bit of code. I'm not going to be able to share the automation application code with you as a Visual Studio solution. These are code files that were developed, either under a client process or under my employer's process. I don't own them. I can't share them, but I can share these little snippets, and that's why we have these slides. This is the process to call flaUI, and pretty simple. We just attach to the application. Uh, you can attach with that name or with the process ID. Um, in this case, the code processes with the process ID, but we could use that name as well. We tell it we're using the UIA3 automation toolset because we are automating WPF. We give it a default timeout. We connect to the main window of the application. We load this condition factory, which is basically the query engine that lets us query that tree to find a control. And we go out and we loop a couple times if we need to give it time to initialize. So pretty straightforward, but that's the code that actually connects you to flaUI. And I am sharing that because it took me a little time to figure that out. Let's see. Okay, back to here. This is just showing that we can access a control via that XPath that you saw from that utility application. So we can use that to find a control. If we don't have an automation ID or we just find this is to be more convenient, it's like 6 of one, half dozen the other. Doesn't really matter whether you use an automation ID or this. But we go get the control by its path. We find a clickable point. We cast it as a button. Remember I said we could cast it as objects. Then we actually click it and then we wait. Give it a 2-second wait to move before we move on. More and more as the Windows Auto application testing gets mature, we're getting away from explicit waits like a 2-second wait to where we have code after that that says, hey, do I see the next screen? Or wait until I see the next screen. Because fixed wait fixed timing waits are problematic. Maybe that machine's running slow for some reason right now. Maybe it's installing an update or whatever, and maybe that 2 seconds isn't enough. But I don't know that. So more and more, we're removing the explicit sleeps and going to loops that check for the thing that we need to see next. Here's a good pattern of how I code most of my tests. First, I call the set flaUI window condition factory. That's a custom method that we put together that reinitializes that flaUI engine to make sure it's connected to the application properly. Um, we have noticed that at times it'll disconnect, and I don't know why, but it does. And the easiest thing to do is just make sure it's connected every time before we try to access it, and that works well. Here we have a custom method that we wrote. This get root control by automation ID is actually part of the flaUI library, and we just give it that automation ID and it goes and finds it. So that's why I said it's a little bit simpler to just have an automation ID. If I'm kind of trying to teach the application developers to always remember to put those in there. It'll come back null if it can't find it. So if it's not null, then I cast it as a text box and I enter the text I want to enter, which is the name of an area. And then we access the keyboard and press enter. So pretty straightforward, pretty much what you'd expect. Then I verify it. I actually go get that data grid as a POCO object, plain old CLR object. There's a separate custom method that does that. Returns everything as an object, just basically a list of T. And then I use a link expression to make sure that name is in there, because that tells me that it went in, it worked. And the .any says, do you see that in any of the names? I know the names are unique, so if I see it anywhere, I know I got it. I only did it once, and then I return the name. So that's pretty much the pattern for how we do. I mean, obviously they get more complicated, but that's the pattern for a test. This is a simple combo box, same kind of thing. Get the control by its name, make sure it's not null. If it's null, we write an error to the log and return false. If it is not null, cast it as a combo box, click it, wait a little bit. This is an optional wait. I use it in demos to slow things down. And then select that particular item based on its index and return true. So for a C# developer, that's pretty comfortable stuff. Notice that you do see me doing thread.sleeps, and that does block the UI thread. Normally in a Windows application, that's a bad thing, but in automation, that's a good thing. We want the automation application to pause while the target application does what it's got to do and catches up. So I do want to block the automation UI thread, which you typically wouldn't do in a Windows application. So just to point that out. Here's a little bit more complex combo box. It's in a grid, so I get the subcontrol by its class name, because grids don't have unique automation IDs. They're repeating objects, and so they can't have unique names in each row. Cannot. So I give it the site row and the cells, and I index it by the column number based on a constant. And I'm looking for a combo box inside that row, that particular row, and cast it as a combo box. Then I do items count. This is something that we learned the hard way, or weren't familiar with when we started. Combo boxes or drop-down lists in WPF aren't populated until they're accessed. So if I just went to select an index on a combo box as soon as I attach to it, those items aren't there yet. So I have to do an items.count to basically force WPF to load the items of the drop-down list. Then I can work with them. And that was something we kind of learned the hard way. But this is a custom combo box. It actually uses a list box item as each item in the list. And so I have to cast as that particular type of object. It's not just a string. And then I check to make sure that's not null. And then I can take that item in the list box and parse it back into what it is in the enum list, for my POCO object. So there's an example of a little bit more involved one. Going back, I think we're almost done here with these. This is showing walking a grid. I get a grid row by ID index. So similar kind of thing. If a grid has 20 rows, but 10 are showing, the grid object says there's a row count of 20, but items 11 through 20 that are off screen don't exist yet until I move to them, right? They're not loaded. So I actually have to move to that row by its index in order to get the WPF engine to load those objects into memory and make them accessible to me in Windows Automation. Um, and then we look here, for the row, the cells, the collection of cells for that row, which cell I want based on which in this case, it's the name column. And then I'm gonna find the first descendant of that point in the object tree that I'm going to use my conditional factory search engine to search for a class name of text block and then cast that as a text block because this particular element doesn't have an automation ID. So I have to find it within its cell of the grid by its class name. And there'll only be one, so that's fine. And then I just check to see if it's the one I'm looking for. And if it is, I add it to the grid. So uh, there's that condition factory that we saw in the initial flaUI setup being used. And if the row count's greater than 0, at the end, we position the grid back to the top. So just by making sure that I have a row, and if I do, I just go get it by that index of 0, and it throws the grid back up to the top visually. So I leave it uh, the way it should be. And you saw in the demo that we can access the Windows system dialogues. And this is the command we use to do that. So we take the flaUI, we get all the top level windows in Windows, and one of those is going to be that dialog. So then we figure out which one is the dialog, and we can manipulate that dialog based on what's returned from this get all top level windows method. So this is how we access applications even outside our target application, whether it's a system dialog or another application. It's our link to all those. And this is, I think, the last code. I just want to kind of show how I really try to layer it. So in the test, I'll say click the report save to CSV button, and I give it a delay of a second before it starts. Then there's that method then in the second part here, and that method happens to know the automation ID. So I don't, when I'm coding my tests, if I've ever accessed that element before, I don't have to remember what that automation ID is because I don't have to stop and use that tool to figure it out. So this helps save that automation ID for me, and I can call this from any of the tests. And then it calls click automation ID button, which is a very generic uh, routine to click any button that has an automation ID, and you see it's got 40 different references to it, where the other ones just have one, or this one only has one. And so that's my 3 layers. Just call what I want to have happen. That one knows the XPath information that it needs, and then it calls the generic routines to do the functions. And that 3 levels. Sorry, I bumped my mouse. That 3 levels is pretty consistent. That's pretty consistently how I separate things in my tests. I mentioned that we use the log as the way to write all the emails. It's the source of truth. So we have methods, write header, write a test comment, write that the test failed, that it passed, and then this is general log write, just comments that no one sees other than me if I open up the file. And then finally, what was our challenges? I'm wrapping up here. What were the challenges that we had? And I alluded to this before. Challenge is timing. Timing is probably the most consistent challenge. It's hard to either wait the right amount of time or to um, know exactly what to check for the next step. Because sometimes one single action can result in multiple things happening on the screen, depending on what you were doing prior to that. We we ran into a problem recently where we have one of those, hey, a new version is available. Do you want to upgrade? Pop up randomly throughout the application. So, having a random pop up in the application is not a great thing because I don't know it's there and it can pop up anywhere, anytime. And it can it obviously blocks the interaction with the screen underneath it. Um, so that's a challenge we're working through right now is to manage our notification dialogue so they don't block the testing. Um, manual steps. As I mentioned, if you're interacting with any kind of an external device, I can't automate that. We have to work around that. Um, Unattended tests. Um, we've all done it as developers, right? It works great in Visual Studio, but then I go to run it on the client machine and it doesn't work. So that happens to some degree as well on this kind of automation. I'll have automation tests that run great in Visual Studio and then not at night. So just because there's differences in the environments, difference in the response time of the machine, and you have to work through that. So that's a minor concern. It doesn't happen very, very often, but it does happen, and I'm calling it out. Um, and then the final challenge was, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, there's not a lot of information on the web about how to do this. So, my typical Google it till it works didn't always pan out for me. I had to figure a lot of things out on my own, and many of which I've included in this presentation. So hopefully it'll be easier for you if you're looking to do this. But there just wasn't much information on the internet. It was rather limited. Um, and but all in all, that's to be expected, and it's not that big a deal. And most of the time, I'm not fighting challenges, so I'm happy about that. Um, and that leads us to summary. And basically, what I really want to point out here is that the Windows automation testing will help provide higher quality software with less development, both less development by the application developers, and it will help provide a faster release cycle. I mean, we're seeing it. I mean, this is direct experience. We can release faster with higher quality because we're doing Windows automation testing, um, and the customers quite happy with it and very happy with the investment they're making. So that's it. Any final questions? See, I'm not keeping you here all night. I'm done.
There was a comment question from Corey Withers. He was actually asking about using UI tests to check for long loading UI elements. So let's say I have a data grid that might take a significant amount of time to load because there's so much
Uh-huh.
data in it.
Uh-huh.
Have you done anything around with testing around some of these elements, making sure that they don't take too much time or they're not impacting the user experience?
Right. So you noticed in my results email that each test had a timing, right? We were able to indicate how long it took to run that test. So if a grid suddenly started taking longer than it should, that would be indicated on that email, right? I, as an application automation developer, would notice that time is longer than it should be, and I start investigating, well, why? What's going on? So yes, that is indicated on those emails. If you feel that that's something you want to test for explicitly, you certainly can do that. You can code it to say, fail the test if this takes longer than 5 minutes, and then it would be an explicit fail. That's up to you as an automation developer. And in fact, that's a perfect way to use automation because no one wants to sit and run, load grids, load grids, load grids manually and see if they're slow or not.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be better off to have automation go over and run 10 different load tests over the course of an hour and tell you how it did. So that's a really, really good use of Windows automation testing. Another thing that I didn't mention is I see really two use cases for this. Obviously, I talked about how I'm on the development team and part of a product development. But let's say that you have a third party off the shelf system that you use and it's critical to your business, and they release new versions once a year or whatever. You might want to set up and it's a Windows application. So you might want to set up a Windows automation test like this to test the features of that COTS application, um, so that you if you can have your Windows automation test 80% of what that COTS application does and features that are critical to you, then your human tester can focus on the last 20%, and that'll save you a lot of time and a lot of money, and speed up your ability to make that migration to the new version. So I see it as part of a product development or as part of a release validation on a critical application that you use. Those are the that I can think of as the two main focal points for this.
Good times. All right, chat. Now's your time to shine. If you have any last-minute questions for Joe, drop them now. If not, Joe's got his contact information on the screen. Feel free to reach out to him directly if you have any questions. But while we wait a second, Joe, thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening.
Yep. You're welcome. My pleasure. I'm glad I could do it.
Greatly, yeah, we appreciate it. We need to get more folks talking about Windows development here on the user group. That'd be a lot of fun.
Still valid, still important.
Yeah.
Don't give up on Windows yet.
It's not going anywhere. We might as well get used to it. And I think we're starting to see folks kind of come full circles. Like everything had to be a web app, and now things are coming back to, well, maybe thick clients are not a bad way to go.
It's like driving a ship, right? You turn the rudder, but it takes a little while for it to get around. And oops, I turned a little too much. Got to go back.
Surly Dev says, what about VBA development? No. We're
VBA?
not going to do VBA development anymore. No.
No, I'm not doing that.
No. Though I'm sure there's some person out there going, hey, I have some Excel and macros I need to write. VBA all the way.
Yeah, it still has a place. Less and less all the time. Maybe another way to say this is, if you're a Visual Basic developer, if you're not a C# developer, you can do all this in VB. It doesn't have to be C#.
All right. Well, friends, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Joe, for hanging out and teaching us about testing. There's a big shortage of testing out there. I know I'm contributing to it directly. So I think everyone should test. I just don't practice what I preach. But Joe, thank you again for hanging out with us. Drew, thank you for sitting with us as always. I have no idea what our topic is next month, so we'll get that out to everyone as soon as we know. But with that, thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be back next month, same bad time, same bad channel. Take care.
Right. Thank you again. Bye-bye.